Welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
We're just
Hi.
going to give it a couple minutes before we get started. This is usually my favorite part where everyone tells us where they're dialing in from or calling in from. It's pretty exciting.
Ray Ching from Singapore. Hello. Hey, Dragon, Carol.
Oh,
Fun.
Amsterdam to Charlotte, Sweden. Wow. Alaska. Wow. That's awesome.
Holy moly.
So exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, Switzerland.
Yeah, I'm always blown away.
You could see a map of everybody in the
I know.
the application
Imagine.
popping in and whatnot.
That'd be
That'd be neat.
incredible.
Thailand, Venezuela.
Unbelievable.
Well, awesome. Let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to our January episode of Hot Seat. Who am I? I'm Awais. I work on SMBs and startups at Notion. For those of you who are new to the Hot Seat session sort of style, it's really meant to walk through a real workflow a founder is trying to build for their team. And they do that with a Notion Pro. In this case, the founder is Michel. Notion Pros are Marie and Ben. And they really get to ask all those nuanced questions and concerns that arise when you're trying to build a whole setup in Notion. Like I mentioned, Marie and Ben, they're probably some of the most knowledgeable Notion users we have. They actually run an entire agency focused on using Notion to integrate work and life with better systems. So feel free to hit them up after this. I want to add that today's a little more special. We actually partnered with AWS Activate for this webinar. And we actually obviously got a startup that's building on AWS, and they're also a Notion user. And the startup is called Airbyte. They're an open source data integration platform for modern data teams. And Michel, who's joining us, is actually the co-founder and CEO. So super privileged to have him join and talk us through his use case. He's going to talk through how he's trying to build an OKR tracker in Notion for his entire company. So again, live walkthrough, informal, in the moment, ask questions in the chat. We'll try to answer directly. Yeah, let's go from there. With that, I'm going to pass it to Michel for him to talk a little bit about the use case.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, as always said, I'm the co-founder and the CEO of Airbyte. We just help company move data from every places where they have data, whether it's a SaaS service like Shopify, Google, Facebook, whatever, and replicate that data back into warehouses so that your data team can be enabled to extract insights, do analytics from there. And we're open source, meaning that we can allow your team to cover the long tail of all these data sources that you might have. Now, how do we build a product like that? We rely very heavily on OKRs. Today, we actually have some blog posts that we wrote on our website where we go over some of the OKRs we had in 2021 and see how we compare to these OKRs. What did we do to make them successful or not? And this is this is an exercise we do every single quarter. One thing we've been doing until very recently is we're big Google Drive users, but as we're growing the team, there are a lot of things that we might be missing. And in terms of discoverability of information, especially as we are onboarding new members of the team. And recently, we really got the team to start using Notion more and more. So when I got contacted about let's build an OKR application on top of Notion, I was, yes, that's perfect, exactly what we need today. And yeah, I provided some our past quarters OKRs. Obviously, there are some confidential numbers in it, so I removed some of them and removed some of the OKRs. But overall, that's how we operate the company. We generally take a week to build them. The way we think about it is objectives is all the high-level company goals, and then we try to assign KRs to specific teams. So some goals are going to be more on the go-to-market, some are going to be more on the product side, but overall, it's really everyone owns part of the KRs. And every week we have our all-hands, and part of this all-hands it's about tracking how we are doing compared to OKRs. Thank you for the nice French accent. Thank you. And yeah, that's how we leverage OKRs. And at the end of the quarter, we just go over them, look at where we failed, where we did this 70% of where we wanted to be, and where we over or exceeded. And also along the quarter, nothing is written in stone. We're also a startup, so there's a lot of things that we discover along the weeks, along the months. So sometimes we just scratch some KRs, sometimes we add new ones, sometimes we adjust to have lower KRs, or sometimes we realize that, no, actually this KR was not ambitious enough, so let's bump it up. So it's a very dynamic process for us.
Perfect. It sounds like you and your team members are all doing this together, or are there just kind of a couple team members that are responsible for this process?
So in general, my co-founder and I and a few other leads, we just think about where we want to be, and after that we try to involve as many people. So we're a remote company, so a lot of what we do is asynchronous. And in general, when we come up with OKRs, we start with the first skeleton of it. We leave blanks, and in general, we let people also contribute to what OKRs should be. In terms of not the value itself, but the outcome expected. And then we have conversation about what the value should actually be. But it's a very team. It's a team effort.
Awesome. Awesome. And I know you've been doing this in Google Docs, to date. I'm curious kind of where maybe some of the friction is in doing it in Google Docs for you, or has it been frustrating, or is it more that now that your team is trying to move more to Notion, you're trying to just kind of see how that process might be easier?
I think it's always that's one of the reasons why we really enjoy Notion, which is the discoverability of these documents, especially as we onboard new people. They are very clear documents that we want to make sure are discoverable. I mean, as you onboard yourself into the company, as you read more materials, you quickly find OKRs. If it's just about looking into directories into a drive, it's not the same feeling. It's less, linking to something, it's harder. So for us, we really see that as making sure that the team is aligned. And the way you align the team is by having them to be able to have access to this information in a very, very easy way. After that, in terms of the usability, I would say one of the thing we like about Google Doc is the ability to have long conversation, commenting, redlining onto the document. But at that point, it's just balancing discoverability and how we iterate on these documents.
Awesome. We had someone ask about OKRs. What are OKRs? I'm curious if you're willing to kind of define it for yourself. I mean, it stands for objectives and key results, but do you want to define kind of how you approach that or define it?
Yeah. So every company, there is a general idea behind OKRs, objectives and key results, which is figuring out very focused goal and strategic goal for the company, and then figuring out how you're going to be measuring your success towards this goal. And there are organizations where you have these cascading OKRs, where you have top-level OKRs, and then each team is going to create their own OKRs for what they're going to be owning for this particular quarter or month or year. But in the end, it's a matter of aligning teams, and it's also a matter of pushing your team forward. One of the rules that was, I think Google released, got this the OKR a more widely spread framework, is every one of your KR should be something that you can measure. And it means that if you can measure it, one, you can have an attainable goal, but you can also have a moonshot goal. And in general, when you set your KR, you should be able to achieve 70% of it. And the 30% is about getting the extra mile and
pushing the limits.
And pushing the limits.
That's cool.
So that is the idea behind it.
Love that.
But it's a matter of aligning and having very clear and measurable results.
Yeah, one thing I noticed about a lot of the OKR templates is that they tend to have this like idea of, where are we and where do we want to be? So it's this measurement of a single move of a number. I think what we want to do today is look at how might we, so we do this thing in our business where we have a scorecard that's associated with a meeting. So once a week, we review all these numbers and then we can measure that. We have like a good, better, best value. So like our best goal is 100%, maybe our good is 70%, and our, and what we want to do today is build a system that allows us to kind of make a varying, amount of achievement and show us like, what's the health of that goal? Is it really good? Is it poor? Does it need checking into? Is there something not going well that is causing the health of this objective to be out of alignment with the goals and things like that? So I think that would be our goal for today. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So Marie, do you want to ask any other questions, or should we kind of dive in and take a look at these OKRs here?
Yeah, I mean, so this is the Google Doc with the OKRs, and we know that you said it's a team process, so everybody kind of has, part of this process. So what we're going to do is translate that Google Doc into a Notion doc and show you how this can be a little bit more dynamic. Again, you can add comments in there. I know Ben's put a template together too that is going to kind of lead how we might build this. But I think we might have some questions along the way as we start building, and we'll say, hey, do we want a person status, or do we want certain fields that might be unique to your company? So we can do that as we build.
I think I'm gonna talk about this real quick and just kind of what my assumption about what I'm looking at here. We've got some color-coded system that shows green, I'm guessing, is kind of like we're right on target or exceeding the target. Yellow is like maybe we're falling a little bit short, and red is like we that's a poor health.
Ben, could you zoom in a little bit more on your screen?
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
some folks are asking for.
Yeah, it's a bit small, sorry. And what we're looking at here, and if I can make some assumptions that this is end of quarter 3, the value was something. So weekly active Slack users is the key result. So the value, maybe we have 1,000 weekly active Slack users at the end of quarter 3. And what we're saying is, where do we want to go to? And so we measure that again at the end of quarter 4, and that gives us our change. And so what we can do is specify kind of where we want to go, and we can measure, on a daily basis, we can go in and update that number, or however many times you want to update it. We can then quickly at a glance see how are we doing towards moving towards these goals. So I think what I'm going to do to start is I'm just going to copy this stuff, and I'm going to make a new toggle with Command Alt 7, and I'll put source OKRs in here. Close my notes.
And typically the way we use colors is exactly for what I was describing, which is if you get to 100%, that's when you get green. If you are at 70%, that's when you get yellow, and red is everything that is not yellow.
So I'm gonna there's quite a bit to do, so we're gonna focus on just a general hierarchy of objectives and key results, and then measuring a single quarter of key results. There's lots of ways that you can extend this going forwards in terms of attaching it to a year or attaching it to a quarter relation in a separate database, so that you can create kind of reviews of, however many times you want to do a review of these key results, you might move that out to a separate database. But we're going to keep it simple for this demo because there's a lot to cover. So I'm going to start with these. So we've got some objectives here: growing community, getting revenue acceleration ready, and getting Airbyte cloud ready for expansion. So maybe I'll start with just creating the objectives database to start. So I'm going to type / and I'm going to type table, and we're going to create an inline database, and we'll just call this objectives. And you can open up this as a page and see the thing. I'm just going to give it a little icon. We'll give it, let's see, goal. Okay. And then the other thing, so like, I'm just going to go ahead and add a couple of these objectives here. We'll start with growing community. Growing community. Great. And then the other source object that we're going to need here is our key results table. So again, I'll type / and we'll type the table, inline table, and we'll type key results. I think I'll give this one an icon of key. Make sense? Okay.
And Ben, would you mind zooming in again, just for visibility?
Yeah, I don't know how Notion will do with this, but we'll see. Looks pretty good. Okay, great. So the nice thing about Notion is that everything is kind of tucked into these things called blocks. And so if I can really quickly here, select some blocks. It's like something changed about blocks. So I can actually I'm going to grab these 4 key results. And I'm going to drag them down here right into the key results table. And you'll see that it automatically, and I'll delete these test ones here. It's automatically created entries for each one of these. So I'm going to clean these up a little because we don't need all this data in here. So we'll say a key result is weekly Slack users, weekly active Slack users. And here we have the number of self-hosted daily active connections and GitHub stars, probably for the open source stuff, I'm guessing. And
Yes.
accumulated connector contributions. That's a fun mouthful. So connectors, as I understand it with Airbyte, is the tools that you're able to, data sources that you're able to connect and feed data between. So that'll be something like Snowflake, or potentially, I think I looked at the suggested ones, and there is a Notion request in there, which was kind of neat.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so we've got an objective and a key results thing. And so instead, I'm going to delete this tags property. And so we want to create a connection between these two, and that's where the relation comes in. So we're going to create a relation, and I'm going to search for key results and create that connection. Rename that to key results, and we'll rename the connection on the other side to objective singular. And I can just highlight all 4 of these and click edit property and change the objective to growing community. Okay, so now it automatically.
And Ben, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just generally something that comes up is, why abstract away objectives and key results separately? Some people might, track key results in one database in the objectives database. What do you see as the benefit of separating out the 2 databases?
So the thing is that if you, I can show like an example of my own personal OKRs where like my key results are usually related to some kind of activity, and what I'd like to do is connect up my key results to other databases. So there may be projects like weekly active Slack users is something that perhaps there's a marketing project that needs to promote the some joining the Slack group or promoting community. So you might have projects attached to your key results. You might have learning outcomes attached to key results and things like that. So the number of GitHub stars, if you abstract things away, you're able to view data in different ways. So at the beginning of the conversation, I talked about how you might, for example, I'll switch over to my personal OKRs here. I have objectives and key results here, and my key results, for example, I'm right now doing my Notion consultant certification. I have it attached to my actions database. I have a project that I'm attached to. I have a learning support, which is attached to my knowledge base and stuff like that. So abstracting out these things into individual databases allows you to connect them to more to other stuff. And so as you're building, you're able to make more connections between the different things that are happening at your business. So it's not just this, as we see with the Google Docs, I can't, how exactly would this piece of text be attached to a bunch of different projects? There's no way to, have that attached in any way. So that's the benefit, I think, of Notion, is that ability to, further abstract. And the nice thing about it is that you can start with a very basic relation like this and make it more complex as you go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I think it gets back to the point Michel was talking about, linking and discoverability. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
I'll let you continue.
Absolutely. So our key results, as we see in our database here, we've got kind of like a where we are and where we're going. And what I want to do is kind of start by creating some fields here. So I'm going to create some number fields, and I'm going to call this one current. That's where we are. So let's say right now we have weekly active Slack users is 1,000, and then where we want to go. So I'm going to actually, instead of creating a new one, we'll just duplicate the number since it's already ready to go. Duplicate. And so we'll create some columns for a good outcome, and we'll do better outcome. And then finally our insert right, no, duplicate, best outcome. So let's say current is, we go to 1,500 for good, 2,000 for better, and 2,500 for best, right? And then our final column, we're going to add one more here, and I'm going to call this actual. And so this will be the number when we actually measure it. Where are we currently in the phase when we're doing a review? And so we're going to make this today that, you're just doing your review right in the key result. You could create a further separation of these and have key results be in a database, and maybe there's a targets or a key results review database that has all your measurements in it. So that way you can determine, like, how often do we actually measure it, and do we want to keep data over time? A lot of people design Notion systems where they kind of update things and they don't have that snapshot of, like, where were we 2 years ago, and they can't go back and look at it. So so that's a thing to think about as you're building these systems. Like, can you take a snapshot at a certain time and measure those results and see how we're performing?
This is actually something we do, is we measure not only the actual number, we measure the growth, because that helps us figure out, are we investing enough in a specific initiative to power that key result. So if we see that a month in, the growth is 30% in we're just 30% there, or 20% there, we know that there is something else that we need to do to get to the goal. So tracking over time gives you some projections.
Yeah. With that in mind, we're going to start adding some of that math here. So let's say our actual was 3,000, and we can say to figure out, like, where we went from and where we're going, we can say what's the actual minus the current, and we can measure the growth. So we can see we've gone up 2,000 to 2,000 in the period. And so
Ben, would it be helpful to add a date range to these, knowing that they want to know when did we actually start this key result, and kind of what was that range, or is that too soon? Because I know you were talking about maybe doing quarters, maybe doing a separate database for weeks. Just wanted to throw that out there as a possible property.
Michel, how often is this once you do this once a quarter that you're measuring it, or would you be going in and doing a measurement every week, and do you need to keep that weekly track of that weekly?
It will depend on the goals. Some, and that's what also is interesting with OKRs, is sometimes it's either it's there or it's not. So it's 0 to 1. Measuring the progress between 0 to 1 on a project is not doable, but on something like active Slack user or GitHub star, connector contributors, this is something that we track on a weekly basis, sometime every other week, but it will depend on the OKRs.
Okay. All right. So now that we've got our diff, and we can kind of measure where we're going on these OKRs, we can add another formula, and I'm going to insert one right to the right here. And so we're going to create a formula, and this one's going to be called health. And I've already prepared a formula for us for this because I didn't want to live write this in real time. So I'm going to put a code block down here by typing 3 backticks. I'm going to paste this formula in here, and we'll wrap this code here. Okay, so I'll take a quick second to talk about what this is actually doing here. So we're basically taking each of those numbers that we created. So for example, format prop current, and we're making sure it's not empty. And we're checking all of these values to make sure that they're assigned. Otherwise, if they're not yet, we're going to see this none thing show up. And this formula is pretty basic. We're basically checking that the actual is larger than the best. And we're saying that it's in the best target. And then we have nested if functions that go through those. And we say, like, you know, if it's beating the better target, then we show the better thing, and then good and poor. So all we have to do is click in here and paste that in and say done. And so now we can see immediately that these two are on target. So if I had one that was, let's say the actual is 150, now we see the diff is only 50. And so that is where we're kind of in the poor range for that right now. And you can see it shows none for ones that are not set up. So GitHub stars, let's look back to the Airbytes one. I don't remember what they had. 4,100 at the end of Q. So we'd say good is 5,000 and 5,250 and 5,500 for the best, and the actual was 5,100. So that's a good outcome right now, and you can see the diff there. So, and then the final thing that I want to add that also we have a formula for prepared for. So let's insert another formula, right? And I have got let's grab this one. And again, 3 backticks turns into a code block. So Notion, this is currently showing JavaScript. Notion's formulas are kind of a JavaScript-y type system. So usually that formats them pretty well and shows you kind of where the functions are. So what we're doing here in this formula is we're checking to make sure that there is a health assigned. So if it's none, we're going to ignore it. We're going to show no status. Otherwise, we want to check to see if there was a change in the from current to best. And so we can show basically, and the meat of this function is this concat thing here, which is concatenating together a bunch of properties and strings to show a kind of status message about the health of the OKR. So we're going to call this status display, and I'll paste in this formula here and we'll see what that shows us. Property not found, prop type. What did I do? We got to add a type. Okay. So I'm going to also add a select box here called type. Notion helpfully told us that I was missing a property that was referenced in my formula. And so what I'll do here is create a number and let's see. Okay. So yeah, now I remember what I was doing. So these, you can create different types and then reference them in your formula. So these are all numbers, but I'm going to use this as I'm going to use this one as an example of a percent. So let's say you're measuring a percentage of something. So currently it's 25%, good is, 30, 40, and 50. And let's say the actual is 100. Now we'll be able to paste in that status message there. So now you can see we've got status display that says what kind of is going on with this, like this, the number of self-hosted daily active connections increased by 80, 20% to 100%, increased by 100 by 2,000, 1,000 to 3,000, and then this one has no status because we're missing that. So again, this allows you to make a OKR system that you can update. You can change what you're measuring. So we do this a lot in our business where we see like, wow, like, we're getting, one of the things we measure as a North Star metric is like number of posts in our circle community, or an average rating on, say, our live office hours or something like that. That might be our North Star metric. So that might be something that we come in and say like, oh, we're averaging way better than our best. So we might come in and actually modify our best goals. We might bump those up because we're doing better than we thought, or maybe we're doing worse than we thought, and we need to kind of average those down a little bit. So again, so now that kind of sets us up as with a baseline. The last piece that I'll add is a kind of progress tracker, which a lot of Notion template builders use these blocks to represent a progress. So what I did here is I'm going to add another to the right here. I'm going to create another formula, and I'll call this one progress to best. So our best possible outcome that we're shooting for, that's like our super awesome goal. How are we doing based on that? And I'm just going to plug in this formula here, and you can see, like, we're crushing it. We've got 200% of our expected, increased 92% here and 120% here. So awesome. We're doing really well on those. And by way of explanation, in this formula, basically we're saying we've got 10 blocks, and we're taking the percentage of actual over best, and then we're multiplying it by 10 and slicing off that number of blocks. So each block represents 10% or so. So we first fill up the filled meter, and then we do the reverse for the unfilled meter. And then at the end of that, we're just concatenating on the actual percentage, so we can see how well are we doing here. So I know that the OKRs template in Notion's template library that Buffer created provides that thing there. So those are those formulas that we created. So that gives us our objectives. And what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to click this objectives database, and I'm going to turn it into a page. And that's going to tuck everything into a linked page here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two columns by dragging an empty column out to the right of this one. And you'll notice that when the blue line shows horizontally, that's where you're going to drop it. And if it shows vertically, it's going to create a new column on the right of that. So you can see now I've got column A and column B. And so what I like to do is I'll tuck these databases over here, and we're going to drag this column off to the side a little bit. And what that does is we really like to work with linked databases, and almost rarely never work with the source database. If you create views on a linked database, it allows you to duplicate the linked database, and retain all your views. Whereas if you create a linked database, each time you'll have to recreate all the views. So this allows you to have the same exact view of your data, but then you can kind of move it around by duplicating it. So if you want to show the objectives on that only relate to the design team or something, you can duplicate that page, move it to the design team's thing, and then change the filter to say, design team or whatever. So to get our stuff back, I'm going to start with actually, I really actually only need, because of this really cool feature that Notion has called grouping, I only need the key results table, and I'll show you why in a second. So let's create a linked database, and I'm going to pick the key results one. It's going to give me exactly what I was just looking at, right? And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the grouping feature, and I'm going to group by objective. Okay. And I'll hide the no objective one. So this allows us to, for example, if I wanted to add another objective, I can actually just click add a group. And that's actually, because it's grouped by objective, I can add that second, for example, what's up here? Getting revenue acceleration ready. I think Airbyte Cloud sounds more exciting as that's a very specific goal. Okay, so I'm going to add a group and just type that in there and create a new page. And now I've actually got, this is actually an objective in that database, because I created it from a group essentially. So now I can make some of those Airbyte ones. So let's see, reach greater than 50% in NPS score. Okay. So let's put that one in there. Okay, so we have got, and I'm going to turn on database wrapping so we can see everything. We'll slide these back a little. And so since we're grouping by objective, I don't really need to see the objective anymore. So I'm going to hide that one. And of course, we got our current, good, better, best, actual, the diff, which we don't really need to see. Looks like Marie's doing something in the background that we'll play with in a bit. And then the type is a percent because this is a 50%, I guess, NPS score. I don't know if it is actually in percent. We'll do number.
And this one is actually an interesting KR because it's grayed out, meaning that over the quarter, we decided to not focus on this one and to focus on other ones. So it was one example where it's not written in stone and we need to adjust as we learn more things and what also we should be prioritizing.
Right. Yeah, so that might be a case for adding, say, you might, in this case, add another field to this and, make it active or with a checkbox or, whether it's relevant or not. And that way you can filter out stuff that you've decided not to focus on, or maybe you just duplicate it and move it to the next year when you want to focus on it. So yeah, here you can see now we've got groups by, so I can actually go into the grouping settings and right now it's grouping the objectives by alphabetical. I'll say hide the empty groups. And then, we can keep track of that. And then the other thing is I'm going to add another view. I really like this look too, where I'm going to create a board view here. And Notion allows us to group on formulas. So I'm going to group on the health. And one of the tricks here is that if you click on that again, it's going to show you this menu that says how are we grouping it? Alphabetical, which will try to group things based on the letters, but we're going to switch to exact because I want to group by exactly the result of the health formula. So there's never going to be a no health one, so I'll hide that. And I'm going to switch this to properties. We're going to make these small. And let's hide all the properties to start. So now we can see at a glance, like the accumulated connector contributors has not been updated with a status. And these ones are grouped by how well are we doing. So if we go back to properties, I'll say, let's enable the status display and that feels good. Maybe we'll put the health in there too, just to be repetitive. So this allows you at a glance to come in and once people have done the updates, now we've got this dashboard that tells us, what column are we currently in. And so maybe, as a leader, I might come in and say like, hey, let's take a look at everything that's in the poor column and really think about this. Or, yeah. So we'll call this one like, what do we want to call this one? This one's kind of like the status update view. This one's kind of the health check view. And then the really cool thing about this is we can see the cumulative connectors. Reach NPS is actually part of a different objective. So I'm going to further group this into a subgroup, and we're going to subgroup by objective. And of course, we don't want anything that has no objective, so we'll hide that. So now we can see we've got a column that shows us, like, based on our getting Airbyte cloud ready for expansion, we can see all of the key results and what health state they're in. And the same thing with the growing community. So that separates those out. So if I'm only interested in the growing community right now, everything is grouped in that way. Everything making sense so far?
Ben, would it be can I ask a question about,
of course,
that I think we get a lot of the time is, Michel's obviously running his company. It's like 30, 40 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's growing pretty fast. And so how do you kind of, now you have this OKR tracker, how do you kind of share that with the team? And there might be some cases where you don't show all the objectives. I don't know, but do you have any recommendations on best practices with like using this tracker across a team of 30, 40 people, whether it's assigning different KRs or OKRs to people, and how would that work?
Yeah, like I mean, I'd start probably by either having a property on the objectives, like whether, because your objectives are typically going to be scoped to a team, and there might be somebody at the company who's generally responsible for updating those numbers in there, so that you can review the health and things like that. So you could even get into a thing where you could use groups to share. So right now you can see Marie and I have full access as guests, but you might leverage the groups thing to specify which groups of people can update and change OKRs. So there might be a leadership role, that might be a product design role. At the companies I've worked for, that's usually a CEO with a combination of product leads that would be defining the objectives for the year. And then within those objectives, you might even have sub-objectives per team. And doing sub-objectives is basically, so if we go into this objectives thing, there's this really cool thing in Notion with relations where if I pick, for example, the same database to relate to itself, it gives me this modal window. And you can see there's two ways you can do this. You can use the same property or create a new property. Notion's example is the epic and subtask thing, which is kind of like a Jira-y type agile way of thinking about things. But we can use this epic and subtask thing. What this does is it actually, instead of creating one relationship, it creates two relationships. So it'll have a reference to the parent if there is one. So I'll just show this real quick. We can create a so it's going to end up creating two columns that relate to each other. And so this one is, you would say, sub-objectives, for example. And then this one will be parent objective. And I think it's not super clear. It might be nicer to. So let's say within growing community, there might be like, grow open source community as a sub-objective. And so you're going to see here that the parent objective is already linked up to that one. And this allows you to have an objective page that shows only the sub-objectives, or you can filter out whatever you want to see. And within these objectives, then I might start saying like team or something. We could use a select, maybe a multi-select. And you might create like product or engineering. So who's responsible for these OKRs? Growing the open source community. Maybe this one's leadership or something. And this one's for product to do. So this allows you to, if you had a product team page, as I said before, for example, we've got this key results thing. We could make a new page in here, and I could actually just say duplicate this, and that's gonna keep all of the same stuff, and I'm gonna drop it right into this page. Oops, I missed. So maybe we have a product dashboard that has only the, and we'll see here that if I go to try to filter and I say, all right, where's that team? How do I get that team? Looks like Marie added an owner. So that might be somebody that if you're personally involved in it, you might have your own personal dashboard that you say, just show me the key results that I'm the owner of. So because the team is in the objective, how do I actually get that and filter that out? So here's what we'll do. We're going to, in the key result database, we can add what's called a rollup. And some of you may be familiar with this, but I'm going to say team. And I want from the objective, I'm going to pull through the team into this, and we'll show original or show unique values is probably the best thing here. So now we know that this one, even though we don't have a team property directly on here, we're pulling it through on the objective. And that allows me to now say filter where team contains product. So now I'm only going to see the key results that relate to the product team within this page. And you could do this by any amount of filters. You could, say like, show me the things that I'm a leader of, that I'm responsible for within product. So you can, make your own dashboards. And what we do at organizations is we tend to make kind of these default dashboards for, say, like heads of product, C-level people, but then we also make a general team member dashboard, and that might include all of the things that they're responsible for, from tasks to projects to documentation that they might be writing or updating. And the same thing goes with something like OKRs, where you could pull in this, and you could have your own system where you create, health checks on the fly here.
And before we leave that topic, Ben, we're getting a couple great questions from Carol, who mentioned, one, do you need permissions to the database to see specific entries or pages of a database? But I think what's more relevant is if you have one team, for example, an IT team, and they need access to OKRs regarding tools and assets, could they also have access to the finance OKRs? Is there a way to restrict that? Is there a way to allow that? I think it's by default allowed, but
yeah, currently no, and I know that this is a sticky point for a lot of Notion users right now, is that if you want somebody to be, you can create a view that is scoped down to just the financial OKRs by limiting that to the team. But as a person who has access to this database in any way, I can always click back to that original source database and see everything. So unfortunately, within Notion stuff, there's, these permissions, if you can view it,
you can scope out, right?
You can scope it out, but that would always allow the user to go up a level. So if there's like private OKRs that have actual financial data that you don't want employees to see or something, there's no way to currently to scope out specific fields, properties, or views in Notion. And I know that that's something that Notion is keenly aware of. And I've talked about this publicly a lot, that's like a very key feature for organizations to be able to limit the amount of the data that they're exposing. Because, a lot of these companies, and I think Michel mentioned this early on, that sometimes you may want to make this, your OKRs public. The only way to do that would be to fully make the entire thing public, and everybody can see everything. There's no way to say, okay, don't actually show maybe we just want to show this OKR or specific pages and things like that. It's a bit tricky right now.
Yeah, so at the default level, you share the whole database, and then at an individual level, you can scope out individual objectives to different groups or different people. So again, if you only wanted the CEOs to see one of those objectives, you can do that. So, at our shared team database, I have a couple goals in there that are private and personal. So I just, hide those from the team, and only I can see those. So it's a little clunky, but,
That's true. I could go into, say, like getting Airbyte ready for cloud. I could say, like if the OKR access, you might make a group called OKR access, and that allows people to view the OKRs. And you could put people in that group, but then you can also do this thing where you could do it by product, by engineering. So create groups for those and allow access. And then you can go in here manually. So I could come in and say, I don't want Marie to see the getting Airbyte cloud ready for expansion one. So I can remove that. The tricky thing is that you'd probably have to go in and do the same thing for the key results, because she'd still be able to see the key results. It would just be that if she was on this side, she would not see, there would be an empty field here. She wouldn't be able to see the other direction. So there's lots of kind of quirky things about Notion that, that you need to be aware of. Marie, it seemed like you were doing some stuff with Weeks. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I wondered if Weeks would be appropriate, just given that they're doing those sort of weekly reviews. And this was something you and I had talked about, potentially building in some kind of agenda process. So new week starts, you click that template, you open it up, and inside your key results are in there. And that's where you could add your comments, add your notes in line. Like you could kind of do some of that, it's not quite Google Docs, but you could go in there and tag other people and say, hey, you know, concerned about these metrics, and you could kind of customize your view there, but at least that would give you a snapshot in time. So if there's properties up at the top where you wanted to add some notes about how do we feel about this week, we canceled X objective, you know, you could add a little bit more of that granular note-taking stuff that you might do, and even just have like a snapshot, you know, of the agenda or even meeting notes around those OKRs right in that entry, if it's helpful. Again, it might be overkill for you depending on kind of where you're at with moving your team into Notion, but just to show you an option of kind of how you could tuck things away into a moment in time.
Indeed. Yeah, and as I mentioned previously, like in terms of Oase asked that really great question, why separate out your key results? So, and then, you know, I could further extend that by saying, like, I could have a database that's just key results reviews. That way I could actually have a stepped, you know, I could save the history of the, you know, the numbers, the good, better, best, and the actual, those could be being updated every week. If we moved the actual data to a third relation, and that would allow us to make a more, you know, a list that shows, like, you know, every time we checked in, it's going to be a new set of data. So I can actually look at the numbers over time. And that would allow me to take that data set and say, feed it to one of the great visualization tools in Notion, where I could actually create a graph. So when I'm looking at a key result, I can see every time we checked in over time, and I can see the growth and how we're doing in some kind of line chart or bar graph, that kind of stuff. That's where Notion starts to get pretty powerful, is the ability to create those visualizations and make, you know, these interactive reviews. So yeah, looks like we have about 10 minutes left. So I
go ahead, Ben.
No, please.
I was just gonna throw some questions out there that I think are really interesting. What's interesting about this topic is we get questions on Notion and the concept of OKRs and the philosophy behind OKRs. And I think,
of course,
one really good question that came from, I believe, Niels is, you know, a lot of the time KRs are not always black and white. You know, either you reach them or you don't. So I'm really curious to hear at least Michel's thoughts as like leading a company and creating OKRs. How do you do you have any best practices or recommendations on how do you track OKRs that are doing it in a little more insightful, incremental way in Notion? Whether it's in Notion or any other tool, it's just like, how do you approach that problem when something is not black and white as a KR?
I mean, to me, if it's black and white, it means that it can be launching Airbyte Cloud. This is black and white. Either you launch it or you don't. Mm-hmm. But for the rest, if you can, like, it can be like NPS, it can be number of stars, it can be number of contributors. These are not black and white. It's a spectrum of where you want to be, moonshot, what you can easily achieve. So I think here you have this spectrum and this non-black and white care. There are sometimes moments where it's hard to quantify a care, where you cannot put a number to it. At that point, I feel you need to find proxies to get you, even if it means creating one or two more KRs instead of one, to try to have a number associated to it, whether it's a Boolean saying 0 or 1, success or failure, or whether it's a progress. And this spectrum that I was telling before.
Yeah,
I think the question.
I think the spectrum thing is interesting, and I would potentially argue that when you have something that is black and white, or yes or no, did we do it, that's not really a key result. That's more of a project or a task. And that might be a thing that, for example, like I showed early on my key results thing, where I have a key result that's like, you know, create a study guide for XYZ, and there may be a bunch of tasks associated with that that are like yes or no, I did it, but like, you know, that way you can measure the progress of a thing. If you want to read 5 books about something, then that's something that's actually measurable, where you have like a place where you're going from X to Z. But those ones that are, you know, I thought it was interesting, you know, these ones that are like, you know, hire a PM, hire a head of product, right? Like those are just, you did them or you didn't. I don't know if that's a key result.
Yeah. This one was a black or white.
Yeah.
I mean, either you do it or you don't.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks that I think are. I was talking to my friend yesterday. Actually, we were talking about OKRs, and he's like, I hate doing OKRs because by Q2, like the objectives and the key results are completely out of line with the actual work that we're doing, and because people don't really go back and like totally destroy what they're doing, and like, you know, it's easy to try to plan an entire year of objectives, but the actual reality of adapting over time to changing situations and opportunities is interesting. I will say from our perspective, we got turned on to this thing. We haven't started this yet, but this framework called holistic context, which is a sort of like they call it a framework for empowering decision making, and they add further kind of layering of so the idea of quality of life statements, and then modes of production are like basically what are the things, how do we need to behave in order to make a quality of life at our company that resonates. And then they have this thing of future resource bases at the end is kind of like what are the tools or what do we need to accomplish in order to promote the modes of production, you know, and so on and so forth. And this is more based in this idea of sociocracy, where there isn't really a specific decision maker. You have more of you're designing more of a general feel for how you want your company to work, and you are constantly reflecting back on what the work you're doing and whether it reflects the context that you want the company to feel like. So it's kind of a different way of thinking about it. But I mean, there's like 100 different frameworks that are all kind of related to OKRs. I know Marie has gone through quite a few of those before, but just something to be aware of, that you don't need to have a hard and fast, you know, attachment to the exact way of doing objectives and key results. You know, you may be more project focused, more outcome driven, or maybe even more habit focused. For me, at least in my personal life, I find that the objectives and key results are sort of a work back from the more identity based habits that I care about. So yeah, I might make some objectives and key results, but the most important thing for me to think about first is how do I actually operate in the world? And I like that type of thinking for businesses as well. That was a bit of a rant.
That was great. That's what OKR discussions lead to, right? The last, I think the quick thing we can end on, and Ben and Marie, since you all see a lot of different types of businesses and teams you work with, we're getting a lot of discussion on how do you improve almost like information hygiene in Notion over time. You know, you can end up creating a lot of docs. There's a lot of stale information that starts to live there. I would argue with not just Notion, but many tools that serve this purpose. So how do you any quick tips or recommendations you want to share in this last 2 minutes?
Absolutely.
You got to hire yourself a Notion janitor, right? Every team needs a needs a Notion janitor. But I think we sort of forget that information management is kind of a role in itself. And so you can't just expect to kind of move your docs over and not have someone kind of helping maintain and guide that and lead that. So yeah. I think you do need someone to kind of be that champion and to kind of maintain it, check in on it. Is this working? And recognize like Notion is a living, breathing thing. Like it's not like you set it up once and you're good to go. The more information you feed the system, the more it adapts, the more you say, hey, actually there's a little bit of friction here. This isn't working. Maybe we need to improve this. And I think that's kind of natural and that's going to happen whenever you're feeding data into a system. So, you know, Ben and I have talked about it being this digital garden and you're kind of pruning things, you've got to clean things up, but you do need someone who is that digital gardener at your organization. And I'm sure Ben has got his own opinions on this too, working at a much larger team, seeing this at scale.
I have two opinions around that. And this is something that I'm really thinking on in this new year in the way that I want to design and structure education around Notion, is that we should be treating Notion workspaces as product. It is a product design activity. You're building apps in Notion. And so you need to think it's difficult because we need the skill set that's required in order to facilitate great Notion spaces is partly technology. You got some databases, there's UI design, there's customer interviews. You should be doing customer interviews internally and figuring out what are you trying to do here actually, instead of just thinking about, you know, as an engineer, I immediately go in and just start creating databases. You know, that's a great way of structuring information, but we should be thinking about like look at the Airbyte website and like what are we expecting users to do when they reach the site? Like what are the actions that they can take instead of just giving them a wall of data? Like give them forms, give them navigation, give them opportunities to discover, and without a Notion space becoming this thing that is what we call Craigslist syndrome, where it's just a wall of links and a search box. Like that is not a helpful organizational paradigm. The second thing is everything for me is structured around the connective tissue of meetings. So build meeting templates that allow you to not only capture agendas and work being done and discussion, but have those interactive linked databases right in the meeting notes so that you're operationalizing your meetings and you're actually creating artifacts and doing the work in a meeting together at the same time. So it's not just logging what happened, but you actually have those databases in there and you can make updates in real time in the meeting. I find that like starting from the procedures, the standard operating procedures, the documentation, and then combining that with a calendar with meeting notes, and then like starting to operationalize through that calendar is like how you start a organizational Notion space in my mind right now. So, yeah.
I think that's such a clear layout, Ben. I think it's a great note to end on. Everyone who attended, you'll get a recording, and we'll for sure share the template and make it as easy as possible for you to use the OKR tracker right off the bat. So excited to follow up, and we'll see you hopefully at the next hot seat session. Thanks for attending, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.